Sewing knits can be challenging, but what if I told you you can achieve perfect results at home with or without the serger? In this video, I'll share tips and techniques I use to get professionally looking results. Hi, my name is Julie and welcome to my channel where we talk everything sewing. In today's video, we will talk on how to sew knit fabrics at home and achieve great results with or without the serger. This video has 4 main parts. First, we will talk about the most common sewing issues and how to fix them. Next, we will talk how to sew knits without serger, then how to sew elastic hem without coverlock. And in the last part, I will share a few practical items that will make your sewing knits experience much easier and better. Getting good results is all about using proper materials and techniques, and you will see how sewing knits can be a very easy task. This video is created in partnership with Organ Needles, needle industry experts with over 100 years of experience in the field. So first, let's talk about 4 most common issues when sewing knits and how to solve them. So even if you stop watching video after these 4 tips, you will improve your sewing experience significantly. So number 1 issue when sewing knits: skip stitches, fabric gets stuck in the machine, puckering seam, and so on. All these symptoms are pointing to one and same issue: wrong needle. I cannot tell you for how many years I thought my sewing machines cannot sew knit items, when in reality I was just using a wrong needle. So you see, when you're sewing woven fabrics, you're using universal needle that has a very sharp point. Now, when you're sewing knit fabrics, because they're created using a different method, knitting, when you hit the thread in the fabric using that very sharp needle point, you damage the fabric thread. So this way the fabric is being damaged and so is your seam. The solution to this issue is very simple: use an appropriate jersey needle. This needle has a rounded tip point, so instead of cutting through the fabric threads, it slips between them and thus creates a strong, durable seam without damaging the fabric. This is one of those teeny tiny things that have massive effect, so you always want to make sure you're sewing knit fabrics using jersey needle. So Organ Needles jersey needles come in either special packets dedicated for this purpose, or you can get this needle when buying a combi pack. And if you don't sew a lot of knits, it's very useful to have this combi pack at home and you can pick that needle whenever you need it. So number 2 most common issue: stretched out seam or fabric. I get so many DMs with this issue saying, "Julie, help, I made a garment but I stretched out the seam, what should I do?" In most cases, the solution is actually way easier and simple than you think. You have to steam it really well and press it. So when this happens, when you stretch out the seam and it gets wavy, don't panic. Go to your ironing board, give it a good steam and press, and you can see how it already starts to appear flat, and the issue in most cases will be solved that easy. So to avoid this issue happening in the first place, you have to use an appropriate needle, use appropriate stitches, which we will talk later in the video, and also remember to never stretch the seam when you're sewing, because especially with knit fabrics, you will get a stretched out effect. So third most common issue is: I made a garment, I washed it, it shrunk. That one is painful. So this issue is caused by not pre-washing your fabric. So it is always important to wash the fabric, press it, and only then cut it. This way you are pre-shrinking the fabric. Now, because knit fabrics are made using knitting, they are more prone to shrinkage than woven fabrics. Because of that, when you wash knit fabric for the first time, it can shrink significantly, and I had experience when my fabric shrunk like by 5%, which is super a lot. So always remember, before cutting the fabric, make sure to pre-wash it, dry it, and then press it using steam. This way you will pre-shrink the fabric and will avoid damaging your garment later on. This is a very expensive lesson. I have made this mistake in the past and ruined several garments, so better learn from my experience than to pay that much for your own lesson. So the fourth issue when it comes to sewing knits, when you cut the fabric, it starts to roll and it makes it very difficult to handle it. The solution here is rather simple. You can get a sprayable starch that will temporarily stabilize the fabric and it will prevent it from rolling. Alternatively, if you don't have spray starch at the moment, you can use paper tape and put it on the seam, so when you're cutting it doesn't roll. It looks a little bit silly, but it does work and it gets the job done. If you're enjoying the video so far, I would appreciate if you would hit the like button so that it gets recommended to more viewers. Thank you, and let's continue with our tips. So now let's talk about 4 ways you can sew knit fabrics without serger. So first one is to inspect your domestic sewing machine, because sometimes current modern sewing machines have elastic stitch option. So here on my Zinger heavy duty machine, which is one of the most common models of the sewing machines right now, you see that there are elastic stitches marked in color blue. So on the stitch length dial, you select the S letter, which indicates stretch. Then on the stitch dial, you select the needed stitch, let's say straight stitch. And we can see that we have that triple stitch effect. Because of that, we will get an elastic seam, and here we have tons of different options for elastic seams, all of which will be suitable to sew knit fabrics, and we even have a mock overlock stitch. Just to emphasize, to do all of these stitches, you have to be using special jersey needle to get the best seam quality. Second way how you can sew knits at home without serger is to use zigzag stitch. Now, it is not my favorite method, however, it does work and it gets the job done. Here, an important part to remember is not to use a very wide zigzag, because once you pull it, these stitches will be visible from the outside of the garment. So instead, you want to make zigzag stitch which is not wider than 2 millimeters. And when you sew it, you get an elastic seam. This is quite a common finish, especially in lingerie or swimwear. Now, this third method works for those who have straight stitch machine only. So this method is actually used by professionals, and when you're sewing knit fabric, you stretch the fabric and then you sew it with a straight seam. Once you release the fabric, it gets back to its original position, and when you stretch it again, these stitches that you made do not break. And this fourth method is my absolute favorite method. It's complete game changer, is to use elastic thread. This thread has more stretch than the standard sewing thread, so you use it as a top and bobbin thread, sew it with a straight stitch, and you get elastic seam with no special stitches required. This is my favorite method to sew knit fabrics without serger. Next, let's talk about how to sew elastic hem without coverlock. So coverlock is a separate machine that is very commonly used to create elastic hems on t-shirts, sweatshirts. While this machine is very useful if you're sewing knits at a large scale, I personally believe it's not a necessity when you're sewing at home just for yourself, because there is a great substitute: twin needle. So twin needle works like that. First, you install twin needle to the machine, and then you thread with 2 thread cones, just like with 1 thread, until the point where you have the needles. Then you put each thread through different needle, and that's it. You sew with a straight stitch. So from the outside of the garment, you get 2 rows of stitches, and from the inside of the garment, you get a zigzag. Now, because of that zigzag, you get an elastic seam, and it's perfect way how to sew hems. My favorite method is to first finish the raw edge of the hem using serger, then fold the hem to the inside of the garment, press and base stitch right through the middle of that overlock seam. Then I sew with the twin needle from the right side of the garment using base stitch as my guide where my needles have to go. Then I remove the base stitch and the hem is very neatly finished, and the best part is that it's fully elastic. One more thing to note is that the twin needles come not only in different sizes but also in different widths between each needle. So Orga needles, twin needles come in 2.5 or 4 millimeters width. Which to choose depends on your preference. However, I can tell you my advice: when I'm working with lightweight knits, I'm using the more narrow twin needle, and when I'm working with thicker materials, like for example for sweatshirt, I'm using the 4 millimeter version. Twin needle is a very practical item to have in your sewing toolbox, so I do recommend getting one. By the way, today I'm wearing sweater made using my pattern for Marie dress, just shortened. This is a pattern I found so many ways how to wear, how to style, and it's so comfortable and cozy, and I think you will like it as well, so I will link it in the description box. You can make it using and applying the tips you learned in today's video. And now we're moving to the final part of the video where I talk about useful things that will make your sewing knits experience easier and better. So first is the interfacing. Interfacing for some reason is not that widely talked, though it has a massive positive impact when it comes to your sewing, including knits. So I do recommend always having stretch fusible interfacing at home, and I like to use it when I'm sewing knit necklines or if I'm working with very sharp corners and I need to stabilize them. There is even special interfacing that you can put on the rolling seams, and when you wash it later on it disappears, so it makes sewing knits easier. Second thing that I want to recommend is the clear elastic tape. I add clear elastic tape when I'm sewing shoulders in knit garments, and it prevents it from stretching out. It is invisible from the outside and you don't feel it from the inside as well, but it does get the job done and it prevents shoulders from stretching out. So this next thing is not necessarily a must-have, but I like to have it and to use it. It's this binding foot. So combine it with the stretch needle, stretch thread and stretch bias tape, and you can sew all around the edge, creating that beautiful elastic finish with just one stitch. It's very commonly used in making kids clothes or swimwear. It's a bit pricey, but if you sew a lot of knit garments, it may be worth the investment. I hope these tips will help you sew knit items with more confidence. Next month we will be sewing perfectly fitted t-shirt, so make sure to subscribe to this channel so that you get notification when that video is up. In the meantime, you can watch this tutorial on how to sew a cozy sweater using the tips you learned in this video. Thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you next time. Bye!